Welcome to Wednesday, Secular Soapbox Day here on the Skeptic Haven Network. I'm your host, Mike Wiseman. As always, I'll be joined by my favorite co-host, Apostacie. Today's special guests are Dr. Kipp Davis, Derek Lambert, and Dr. Josh Bowen. Welcome. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and support the network on Patreon. Let's start the show. Been a minute since I mucked that one up.
Okay.
Hi, Stacy.
Hi.
All right, what do you got for us?
Well, we have three amazing guests here tonight to talk about whether or not the Bible condones slavery. So before we bring them on, I just wanted to give a little introduction of who we have tonight. So first we have Derek, who is the host of Mythvision podcast. It is a channel about religion, mythology, and religious text, hosted by Derek Lambert, and he often does discussions with scholars and different people, even Christians who, oh, hey, Derek, how's it going? Yeah, so he has tons of content. So subscribe to his YouTube channel and also become a Patreon. So thanks for being here. Next, we have Dr. Joshua Bowen, who graduated from the Johns Hopkins University in 2017 with a PhD in Assyriology, as well as his PhD. Josh holds a BS in religion from Liberty University, a THM in the Old Testament from Capital Bible Seminary, and a MA in Near Eastern Studies from the Johns Hopkins University. So thank you so much for being here tonight, Dr. Josh. It's great to have you on and meeting you here on Skeptic Haven. My first time having you on the show. So once again, thank you for coming on. And last but not least, we have Dr. Kipp Davis. And Dr. Davis's research focuses on the transmission and interpretation of scripture in Second Temple Judaism and the issue of manuscript provenance and authentication of fragments in private collections. His publications in these areas include the monograph, and his most recent work combines forensic approaches and scribal studies to develop innovative tools for detecting manuscript forgeries. So once again, thank you for coming and being here, and we're so looking forward to having you all on and having this discussion. So welcome, everyone.
Thank you.
Great
to be here. Thanks.
Welcome. Yeah, thanks for coming on. Thanks for taking the time, guys. Absolutely. So we're talking about slavery in the Bible today. Does the Bible condone slavery? Do we have a universal yes on that?
Yeah.
I
mean, okay,
right.
over.
That was it. Thanks, guys, for showing up.
Love y'all.
No topics here. Tough topics.
No.
I mean, I do think that it's an important question to ask how we're defining condone.
Yes, absolutely.
Because there are sort of two primary ways that we do that, right? One would be sort of synonymous with endorse, which is just sort of give public approval of something. But I think the more common way that we use condone is to say, well, this is something that we consider to be wrong or immoral, but we'll allow it. And actually, I think that's an important point, because if we're using it that way, I would say no, the Bible does not condone it, because that would assume then that the Bible considers it to be something wrong that it's allowing. And I don't think that's the case. So when I talk about it, I use the term, does it endorse it? Because it absolutely does that. And it does condone it, again, if you're using it in that other sense that is closer to endorse. But
or even like sanction, right? Another word to say sanction it, or to go out of their way to approve this kind of practice, and it does. And the silliest little things get me is like when people go, he can outlaw shrimp, and it's like, okay, you got a point, like shrimp, but humans and owning humans and whatnot, it lends credence to more of a natural point of view, by the way, more of a skeptical, like, this seems man-made rather than divine.
Absolutely.
But Derek, I mean, look, let's be honest. It wasn't really slavery.
There
right,
it is.
guys. I mean, it's more like owning a credit card, right?
Credit card system.
Having a part-time job.
Yeah.
So yeah, what was the slave? Let's define the slavery. Like, what kind of slavery was it in the Bible times? Well, because we get the Christian argument all the time, oh, it was, like you said, just a credit card. It wasn't that bad. It was helpful. It was a good kind of slavery. So what kind of slavery did we have back then?
I think the hesitation is probably all three of us are thinking, well, all three of us could answer that. Which one's
Who's going to grab it?
Who's going to do it?
That's why I literally wanted to, like, either you or Kipp, because your expertise in this is in this area. I'll just say slavery was universal to begin with. That doesn't mean that there aren't people within the system and the framework in which they were in had benefits or even benefited in some respects. And this is the interesting thing about apologetics that we find is they'll go, some slaves had it better off than, and it's like, the system sound like it's good.
Mhm.
As if God doesn't have the power to, create and make things that aren't like this. But anyway, I'd love to have you or Kipp really define this in the ancient Near East.
Add on to it. Let's do it.
I think. There are we see a few different varieties of specifically slavery within the Hebrew Bible. Certainly, Hebrew men. Israel, sons of Israel, part of the tribal confederacy, were able to hire themselves out as debt slaves, basically, or if you owed a debt to a creditor, they could just enslave you. And according to the law, if you were an Israelite-born man, then you were supposed to be freed after 7 years and return to your own hereditary property. Because one of the things that's quite important throughout much of the law codes is this idea that the land belongs to Yahweh, but He has parted it out to all of His people. So everyone's got a piece. You could Israelite-born women were not so fortunate, and again, some of this has to do with the time period we're talking about, and with the specific texts in view. I think it's fairly common to see that originally, when women were purchased for labor or as in a form of concubinage, like a slave marriage, then they were in that contract. They were kept for the duration of their life. But this is something that gets overturned. I suppose in the book of Deuteronomy, you see that women are then sort of included in this 7-year emancipation plan. So what men and women of Israel are treated differently, but then if you have to let your slaves go free every 7 years, where are you going to get them from? So the Bible provides for purchasing slaves from the people in the nations around you, from foreigners who have settled within the country, and these are people that you can purchase. You can hand them down as part of your inherited property, or your akuzah. According to the text, you can pass this down to your sons as an inheritance, and you can keep them for the duration of their lives. One of the things I think is important to clarify and to point out here too, though, is that aspects of what we would consider slavery in the modern world are probably also reflected in just some of these familial relationships within ancient Israel. I'm thinking in particular about the status of women. Women in ancient Israel were regarded as part of the household property, for lack of a better term. You were born into, if you were born into an Israelite household, you started off as a bat, as a daughter, and you were, under the total discretion of your father until you were married and you became a wife, at which point you basically transitioned from being under the authority and the control of your father to the control of your husband. So women were always in this state of belonging to a man. And within that system, there's very, very few provisions that are actually made for women to the benefit of their of what we would consider their liberty or their freedom or their self-determination or their choice. So while they're not slaves, they exist within a system that promotes a type of control that is effectively not much different from what we would see as slavery today. So did I get them all, Josh?
Yeah, I think so.
Nothing to add there, Josh?
I'll stop talking now.
No, that was great. Thank you. Appreciate that. That was amazing. You used a word I've never actually heard, which is concubinage. Concubin. That's an amazing word.
Concubinage.
There it is. Never heard it. Now I've heard it twice. Dr. Josh, you got anything to add?
Now you can do a show on it.
Maybe, yeah.
That's a great idea.
Yeah, I mean, I think that what would be, I mean, obviously we do this however you guys want to, but one of the things that I've noticed is that some of the most effective explanations come when bad apologetic arguments are pushed against us. And so one thing that so if you guys, like, as my health theology professor used to say, of course, he said it much more arrogantly, give me your worst, most convincing argument and I'll destroy it. Like, that's whatever you guys think is like the best apologetic arguments. Those are probably the ones to throw out here, because I feel like we've probably heard them all a time or two. But one thing that we should note is that one of the things that often gets sort of brought out here, besides stuff like, it's not antebellum slavery or, whatever, is that we sort of, I think, give too much ground as atheists and skeptics when we say, well, yeah, I mean, but that's for Israelites, as if the Israelite servitude or slavery wasn't as bad. One of the things that I think people fail to notice in passages like Exodus 21, 2-6, is that there's chattel slavery for Israelites. And so if you think about that passage, it's something that sort of gets glossed over because the focus of the passage is on the male debt slave, right? And for everybody I'll try to do it off the top of my head. If a man sells himself, or if a man purchases a Hebrew slave, he'll serve for 6 years, set free in the seventh. If he comes in alone, he'll go out alone. If he comes in with a wife, his wife will leave with him. If the master gives him a wife, then the wife and the children, when he goes free, will belong to the master. But if the man says, I love my wife and my children and my master, and I want to serve, or I want to remain, then he'll go to before God, or however we're translating Elohim there. And before the doorposts, have his ear pierced with an awl, and he will, then serve for life. So what happens in this scenario? The law is setting up different circumstances. And the essential aspect of this that gets glossed over is that the wife, the slave wife, is a chattel slave. The children that come about because of the sexual interactions between the man, the debt slave, and his wife, are also houseborn slaves. They are chattel slaves. They are property of the owner. Period. So, like when Paul Copan says things in his book, "Is God a Moral Monster?" Like, well, what could the guy do? Well, he could go out and like save his shekels and, try to pay off her debt, or, wait until, her term of service is up. No, miss me with that shit, right? She is not there because of a debt. The children are not there because of a debt. The debt slave, the male debt slave in this circumstance, is being used for procreative purposes. He's there to provide the master with more slaves, period. And so this is the reality. So those are Israelite chattel slaves. And of course, the man, if he decides to stay, he becomes a chattel slave. His slavery is no longer contingent upon a debt. And so those are important things, I think, to point out.
Yeah. Nice job. Thank you for that. Oh, we got a Mythvision podcast. I have read these books.
Someone was claiming.
There's evidence right here. You're wrong. Something interesting, Josh, that came to mind while you were talking about this, and I hope you don't mind me just mentioning a hypothetical, because a lot of times Christian apologists don't work within hypotheticals. Well, what does the Bible say? But can you imagine us going through a transitional phase where human sacrifice was actually imagine we had more evidence, right, in our Bibles of human sacrifice being there. It's there, don't get me wrong, which we've shown, but like overwhelming evidence that shows us. It's kind of like we do with slavery. What kind of gymnastics would be going on today to make that justified? And it seems so obvious that the way people worked then was radically different. And so it's always amazing how God works within those frameworks. And it's like, this is supposedly a God who's supposed to know, at least if you're at least an omniscient type of believer, if you're an open theist, even then your God's limited to the knowledge of humans. It's just so odd that we have these constructs. And what's interesting also about the slavery you bring up that I find fascinating is we don't have a recording, right? We don't know exactly what was happening. But as Kipp was saying, if you take the model of what happened in the South, or in America really, period, because it wasn't just in the South, if you take that as a model, as human behavior, period, and you go, it's kind of interesting how they saw the Bible and it fit their own circumstances, apart from the color, looking at color as what makes one a slave or a property or whatever. I imagine humans have a common behavioral theme. And I can't imagine, if this is the model in which they were living in the ancient world with slavery, that it's not going to somewhat look like what we had here, minus the race hate.
Yeah.
The idea of racial distinction. But there's still tribal distinction. So while it may not have been color, it may have been like, oh, those damn Canaanites, or screw those Amalekites, or
especially though.
It's just another way. Sorry, Kipp, I'll shut up. But this is why the race thing is such a red herring in this discussion. Because it's how you create the other. It's othering another group. And that's the key, because by othering the other group, you can then put them down and subjugate them. And this is what we see in the ancient world. This is what we see in the biblical texts, as we saw in the South. They're all atrocious.
Absolutely.
I was an important distinction to make, I think, here though, is that we hear it all the time from apologists about how biblical slavery is not the same as antebellum slavery, and quite often my response is, well, are we sure? Just because what we're provided for, that should be the terrifying aspect of all this, is what we're provided within the text is an idealized picture of this, we really have just a very, limited sense of how this actually worked out in the real world on the ground. One of the things that I wonder about, one of the things that I spend time working through and looking at, it's a different period, but I spent quite a bit of time working with concepts of literacy rates in the Second Temple Jewish Palestine. We know far less about literacy in the First Temple period, but it's still by and large you're dealing with an illiterate society, and if your laws are in fact written down, there's no guarantee that everybody knows them. So, I mean, how much opportunity is there within this world, within the system, to manipulate people who are marginalized and who are on the bottom of this social order. And I wanted to make one important clarifying distinction too here. I would say, I mean, the big difference here is, and Josh is right, it is a bit of a red herring to fixate on the racial aspect, because it's still very much there is a tribalism involved that makes this system possible. But the big difference in my mind, the one big difference here between when you're comparing the antebellum slavery with the biblical slavery is that the antebellum slavery was based on this conception, this anthropological idea of white supremacy. Within the biblical period, your people are operating within this system of tribalism, and they're constantly othering outsiders. The important distinction here is that they're also keenly aware that they could be slaves too. It's just I guess the big difference here is that unlike, the 17th, 18th, 19th century African slave trade, virtually anybody in the ancient world theoretically could be a slave.
That's a good distinction to make.
Doesn't sound like fun.
No.
I mean, imagine being on
What a world to live in.
end, right? It's like, imagine being on the receiving end. We're sitting here having to deal with what we call slave apologists online, and not all Christians do this. Anytime I hear Christians accept and admit, I'm like, good for you. Thank you for seeing that this is not good. You got to try, as skeptics, people who aren't Christians, patting people on the back who are ethically and morally in that progressive camp, not trying to defend some inerrant approach. But if you or I or any of us or they were on the receiving end of being a chattel slave, I can guarantee you every bit of their bone in their fiber, their being would be like, this is not my kids. Like, this person owns them, like can do whatever to me physically when they want, as they please, even if I don't want to. Like, this isn't even just a spousal thing. Like, we have laws in America that at least grant the wife to say, you can't rape me. I know I'm married to you, but like, you cannot rape me. You do not have that say if you're a sex slave. Whatever that owner wants is what he gets. The only thing is, you can't beat him to death. Okay. Come on. What
Only
kind
one
of
rule.
justice is that for the slave,
Didn't you ever hear, though, like in church services, like the sermons kind of talking about how slavery, like they kind of justified it in a way, and they would turn it so that it would make it sound like it was an okay thing? Because I remember hearing sermons where it was like, it was okay then, and this is how we are slaves to God, and this is why it's okay, and now we are to be a slave to Christ. And this is how it's turned to good. And this is how we can be. Like, that's how I remember hearing slavery being discussed. Like, what
They
do you
changed
think
the
about
word
that?
slavery
Yeah, there you
to
go.
be a little more soft.
Yeah, because that. However, I heard about slavery was more in like, but now you can be a slave to Christ. So
Good question. What excuses have you heard from Christians to defend it? That's a good one.
The latest debate you guys had.
Hmm.
It wasn't even, that was probably the more sophisticated approach. It was like a progressive revelation type of approach of saying, like, from the beginning, it's our fault. We humans did it. God kind of stepped back and let us do the chaos that we do.
Right.
He only interjected time, from here and there, but that wasn't the goal. So like that was, I would say, if we're granting the best option is to try and act like, well, look at where we've come from. Look at where we're at now. God has led us to this where we are now. And that was their way of trying to get out of, look how bad it was back then.
Yeah.
And I will say that I think one of the progressions that I see, and I feel like I talk about this topic a lot.
You sound tired.
You wrote a book on it.
Yes, you did write a book on it.
there it is.
Oh, there it is twice. Nice job.
I'm actually working on a second edition of it now because you answer all the first wave of apologetic arguments and then they throw a whole other set at you. So you got to make a second edition. But one of the most insidious is the word I like to use when I think about this. Defenses is when people try to, instead of just saying what Jonathan Beasley and Stephen Boyce said, which was, slavery's bad. We start with that, like slavery's bad.
Yeah.
They're not defending slavery. They're defending God allowing it.
Yeah.
Which is different. Still bad, but it's different.
Yeah.
It's when people say things like, okay, well, like, let's go to Exodus 21:20-21, right? That if you go there and if a man beats his male or female slave with a wooden rod and they die immediately, they will, certainly be punished, whatever that means, probably death. But if he survives a day or two, then he will not be punished because he's his property. All right, how do you address that? And the apologist says, oh, well, this. So I had somebody say to me, well, wooden rod. I mean, if you read the Proverbs, like, this is like metaphorical, right? It's not like a really beating him with a wooden rod. This is like, it's loving them because you do that with your kids.
Yeah.
And then like 2 minutes later, they said, So if he doesn't die, that's the thing. And I said, well, how do you kill someone with a metaphorical rod? Right. And they were stumped, but so weird. But
you do the same thing with the kill every man, woman, and child. And they're like, oh, it just means like, kick their butt.
Yeah. Tickle them a lot.
Why didn't it say that?
Say harsh words.
Yes. Yeah. But what happens is this is where it gets bad. When they actually are backed into this corner, because they have this underlying absolute commitment to not only the inspiration and inerrancy of the text, but that God is all omnibenevolent, right? He can't do or allow anything that's actually immoral, right? Or endorse things that are actually immoral. What they will say is, well, I mean, it's got to make sense. Right? The system has to make sense.
Course.
And so what they'll say is, well, I mean, how else were masters supposed to keep their slaves motivated and in line? And at that moment is when you say, let's go look at the laws in the antebellum South. Because when you compare, I wrote about this in volume 1 of the Atheist Handbook, when you compare the laws in the antebellum South to the laws in the Hebrew Bible, the rationale is exactly the same. Did you know that it was illegal to kill your slave? You can't murder your slave. And in fact, it was illegal to give them more than moderate correction. Right? Of course, nobody obeyed that fucking law, but that was the law, right?
Yeah.
And so when people start to say things like, well, how else are you going to keep your slave in line? How are you going to motivate them? It's exactly what the judges were doing when they were thinking about these cases. And they're thinking about, well, the master has to be able to beat their slave with moderate correction, because the slave has to be able to be disciplined and motivated and corrected and stuff, but you can't kill them. Those are laws of the antebellum South. Like, so is that is that really the hill you want to die on, Mr. Apologist? Like, we good now with the laws of the antebellum South? Those are the ones that are really insidious to me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Thank you.
I just heard just recently a clip of John MacArthur defending slavery. And
I was just thinking about that.
were you? Yeah.
It was.
You're up next, Kipp.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you bring up like John MacArthur or Calvinist, right?
Doug Wilson.
You know, I came out of that, and so I'll tell you, there's a. Oh, you did.
Yeah.
It's a different. You're dealing with a different. It doesn't change the game in terms of what we're saying today, but you're dealing with a different kind of animal, because we already think, and I say we as if I'm Calvinist, right, for the argument's sake. We already think that you're worthless dung. I mean, your righteousness is filthy rags. You deserve, this is kind of the motto, you deserve the absolute worst that you can possibly get by this righteous God, this all-powerful righteous God. So what? Slavery? Come on. You know, that's kind of the thing. It's almost like...
So what? Genocide?
Yeah, they actually, so there's something in the theology that like enjoys the bad. Like we'll find a passage, right? Joseph
to the glory
gets
of God,
pulled
right?
into Egypt. And then later on, Joseph finally comes out after his brothers and everybody did what they did to him. And he's like, listen, what you meant for evil, God meant for good. So like God uses evil to do good.
It's totes adorbs.
But people like MacArthur, though, too, they're trapped by their own hermeneutic, because there is no allowance in there for like a more progressive theological model, like our interlocutors, Stephen Boyce and Jonathan Beasley, from the debate that Josh and I did a month ago. There's no wiggle room in there, right, for making a sensible departure from the text, even far enough to allow for this progression of enlightenment. He is stuck with the text, and because of this rigid hermeneutic, he's got to figure out ways in which the text, which says terrible things, can become somehow palatable. And I mean, there's just no way to do that beyond just sitting on TV and going, well, it wasn't that bad.
Yeah, exactly.
I hear it all the time. Absolutely. Yeah. Question here with the Hebrew word ebd. How do we know when to use slave or servant when translating? Good question.
You want it, Kipp? You want me to do it?
I'm thinking about it. Maybe you've got an answer already.
We can do both.
Yeah, I'll go first while you think.
Thanks.
So philology is done. Lexicography is done. Getting it to the meanings of words. It's all contextually based, right? So there are 741 occurrences, I think, of eved in its noun form. Don't ask me why I know that. I have to go through each one.
Because you wrote a book.
Yeah.
This is your job now.
And one of the things that you see is that context will drive in every case. Now, sometimes context is just not clear enough. So, for example, it is bored. You don't know whether I'm talking about a 2x4 that has a hole in it, or if it's talking about like a dog that's sitting there looking around, waiting for something to do, right? You don't know. Context can't tell you that. However, if I said, like, I am really bored, it's hard to imagine that there's a hole in my arm, that somebody's drilled through, right? That doesn't seem to make sense. You could make that argument, and apologists will, right? But no, this actually means like a good kind of slavery.
Worst analogies ever. Yeah. Worst.
But so when you look at the word eved, it's simply like if you sort of move out to its broadest overarching concepts, it's someone who is subservient to someone else. Generally,
slave of the god.
Yeah. So you'll see things and this is what apologists do all the goddamn time. Well, I mean, Moses was a servant. I mean, Jesus in Isaiah 53 is the servant, right? Like, yeah, mismade that shit. See, because the term is broad enough to be applied in various contexts. What you can't do, to give an English example, right, is again, like with the word bored. That's not a good example. Like running. Like, I can't say my refrigerator is running and actually make an argument that it's like going for a jog around the block, right? You can't do that. Even though that word running has this idea of like forward motion, probably at a faster speed or something. Fuck, I don't know. So in the same way, Eved, you can say, as Stacey, you were saying earlier, like in the New Testament, this bottom up projection of society, or look at society as like, well, hey, you are slaves, you're very low, but you know what, you're slaves to Christ, right? And so like embrace that and whatever. In the same sense, you can't then take this meaning of Moses as a slave, or to go more broadly Semitic, like, in the Amarna period, these Akkadian texts that talk about these petty kings that are in Canaan that are writing to the Pharaoh and saying, your servant, your slave, your wardu, in Akkadian, like you're the equivalent of Eved. You can't then say, well, God, that guy's a king. A slave can't mean slave. Well, yeah, motherfucker, it can, right? Because slave means different things in different contexts. So what you have to do, and I'll shut up, but what you have to do is you have to look at the immediate context. And if it says shit like his master can beat him or he will be owned as property, he's probably not a king.
Yeah.
That's not how kings work, right?
To get into the details here, Josh, on the idea of using biblical language in the New Testament, when Paul says, I am a slave of Christ, he says this a lot. That same term, and now this is in Greek, of course, but that same term still gives, kind of like you said, my refrigerator's running. It's functioning, it's running, it's operating in motion in some way that's causing it to work. But it's not going for a jog. Both of them are kind of, in a sense, actions. The point I'm getting at is if you said I'm a slave of Christ, this seems to be whether or not he's literally a slave, and that could even be an argument that he's trying to imply, but it's I am completely subordinate and submissive. I am absolutely obedient. So it still reflects, kind of like when we did our flat earth discussion. We talked about Bible language and like people are trying to make it round earth, but it clearly in its root is trying to imply flat. So even when you go to the language itself, it kind of implies you've got a flat cosmology here we're working from. I imagine if I'm a slave of Christ, the analogy would be we know real slaves and we know how they're supposed to be obedient and submissive and anything goes when the master says. I'm saying I'm a slave of Jesus. Now, does Jesus literally have me as a slave owned? Maybe he is trying to convey that. He's trying to say, I am bought and owned and
with
purchased. And his burden is
that's true.
See what I'm trying to get at? Like,
that's what heaven is. You're going to be Yahweh's slave for eternity. I mean,
and this is why Jesus in Luke 17, sorry, Kipp, but when he, and I'm not a New Testament scholar, just not my area of expertise, but like, this is why when he gives this like example, which one of you worthless disciples, if you had a slave out working in the field all day, when he came in, at the end of the day would say, here, come, sit and eat. You're like, no, you'd say, get in the kitchen, get your apron on or whatever, and make my meal. Come and wait on me while I eat. And then only after you've taken care of me and I've eaten can you eat, right? And when you've done those things, you wouldn't get any reward for it. You've just done what you were supposed to do as a worthless servant, right? That's why it works. That's why the story works.
See, as I think through this, I mean, I think Josh's response was very much on point. Yours too, Derek. But
Just tell me
as I think through it, I think Derek makes a great point here. I'm not entirely convinced there is a meaningful distinction in the biblical text in view of, I think a lot of what Derek said in those places where we would be tempted to translate servant, it's conveying an aspect of slave. The idea in a lot of these texts is that it's conveying an aspect of this slave master relationship that is probably important in the mind of the author to communicate to his audience. So when you slave of Christ, servant of Christ, slave of Yahweh, servant of Yahweh, these are maybe these actually confuse the matter more than anything.
Yeah, that just getting on that point, whether it's servant or slave, I think the same. Imagine someone isn't a literal slave, but they're using the language. Maybe they're implying using that, what we know what real slavery looks like, right? I'm trying to say I am serving to the point of absolute, everything is theirs of
Devotion.
me. But
exactly.
you almost can't distinguish of them being an actual slave at that point. So when Paul uses that language of Christ and he says we're purchased, we're bought with his blood, we're, like his burden is light, his yoke is easy. You go, like, maybe Jesus doesn't literally, of course, own them because they have a Christology. He's a resurrected Jesus by this time. But that model is as real in their heads as a actual slave is to their master, kind of thing.
Great stuff. Thanks, guys.
Yeah.
Well, what else have you heard? Like, throw it at us, like there's the Deuteronomy 23:15-16 one, right?
Favorite verses. What do you guys got? Throw them out.
Yeah. I mean, if you guys know that one, I'm sure you hear it all the time, right? When they start getting backed into a corner. Well, as bad as it was, like Deuteronomy 23 says that if a servant runs away, you're supposed to just let him live wherever he goes. You're not to return him to his master. Nothing like that in the ancient Near East anywhere. And then they go read something from Hammurabi that has nothing to do with the situation that's being described in Deuteronomy 23, but it sounds really good. Do you guys know what verses I'm talking about? Because those come up a lot.
No, bring them up.
Yeah.
I think you did.
I mean, I'm sure if you mention them, I'll remember. But.
So text says if a slave, sorry, I'm doing all this from memory here, but do not return a slave who escapes from his master to you, but let him dwell like in your land, in whatever, within your gates, in whatever place he chooses. Like, do not oppress him, right? Don't return him to his master.
That's pretty good, Josh. Actually, I'm looking at it.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah.
So the problem with this verse is it sounds really good, right? Oh my God, like this would do away with slavery, right? If anybody can just escape and you can't return them. So these are not Josh's ideas here that I'm getting ready to say. They never are, almost never are. Part of what I do, they're Megan's every time. No, the point of the books that I write are to bring together consensus scholarship of subject matter experts and say, here's what the people that know say about this. And then here's why, because I have the language training to establish it. So here's the problem with an apologist using that passage, and I'll keep it short because I'm sure Kipp will say shit about this. But the book of Deuteronomy is very much so it's established very similarly to a Neo-Assyrian vassal treaty, and it's a vassal treaty between Yahweh and his people, right? As opposed to one king of a nation over another king and a nation. But the way that the book is set up is just read through Deuteronomy and you'll see that Israel is supposed to be the head and all the other nations are supposed to be the tail, right? They're supposed to be at the top. So if you read through like Deuteronomy 20 and the rules for warfare, I'm sure we're all familiar with that passage. What are they supposed to do? They're supposed to go conquer all the cities that are around and make them vassals and then, wipe out everybody that's in Canaan. So effectively taking control of everything, right? Israel is supposed to be loaning to the other nations, not taking loans from the other nations, right? So this is the reason that you see this sort of utopian stuff in like Deuteronomy 15, where it says you set a slave free, you give him all this stuff, you support him and you give him all these supplies. It's very utopian, but it's to try to build Israel up to be the head. So when you come to Deuteronomy 23, 15, and 16, what you're dealing with, and there's some interesting little clues in the text itself, you're talking about Israel is not supposed to have extradition treaties with the nations around. And this was very, very common, not only in the biblical text, but in the ancient Near East. There are lots of examples that I'll be citing in more detail in the second edition. But what's supposed to happen here is that if a foreign slave escapes across the border into Israel, we're not talking about an Israelite slave that escapes in Israel to another place in Israel. We're not talking about a foreign slave who's escaping from his master. This is a foreign slave that's escaping from the nations around into Israel. In that case, Israel is supposed to take a hands-off approach. Notice that it doesn't say you can take him as your slave or like here you hide him or any. Let him be. Let him go where he wants to dwell. And this is part of the thing that tips you off that this is not an Israelite that's escaping, because it says let him choose where he wants to live. Well, an Israelite wouldn't choose where he wants to live. He's got land assigned to him.
Yeah.
So he would go back to his property. Right. So again, this is why scholars, people can read Samuel Gringus. He's got a tremendous book that really goes into some detail about this. But this is not the flex that they think it is. This does not do away with slavery. This is about not having extradition treaties with foreign nations around.
Yeah. I think the one that maybe surprises me a little bit when I hear it is this idea that Yahweh is all about freeing slaves, because Exodus, right?
Right.
And
400 years later.
Yeah. So, well, there. Yeah.
Oh gosh.
It's this silly idea that Yahweh just hated slavery so much he basically decimated the kingdom of Egypt in order to get the Israelites out of this system of oppression. And of course, that's not at all what the text is about. The text is, the sons of Israel, Yahweh's special. They're his special people.
His pet project.
His special project. I like that even better. So he doesn't give a fuck about anybody else except these people. So he's focused on emancipating his people. They are his, they're his heritage after all. They're his inheritance. They are the people of Yahweh. As I think about this, though, I think actually where this comes from, this idea about Yahweh, the great God of liberty. I think this actually comes from Cecil B. DeMille's The Ten Commandments. And maybe nobody else in this panel is old enough to know what the hell I'm talking about.
Can you explain?
But,
Yes, please.
I'd love to know.
sorry,
Ten commandments.
Cecil B.
What?
Ten Commandments. So it's a movie from like the 50s, and it's like this is a real movie. Like this was back in the day when you had like 1,500 actual extras just wandering around to make these epic
No
scenes,
computers
right?
involved.
No. In fact,
It was a talkie.
It was in color. In fact, the scene with the pillar of fire is one that they actually, cell animated, like had painted to the movie, right? Because it was that primitive.
Fancy.
But it's pretty and it's long too. It's I actually used to own a copy on VHS. You guys have heard of that before, right?
Yes, of course.
Yeah.
We're all that old. Yes.
And it was like two
Except for Derek.
VHS tapes. It
I
was
know.
super long. But at the very beginning, and I don't know if this was I love this movie. It was on like the first day of Easter break every year. So I was like, yes, sit down. Well, anyways, at the very beginning of this film, Cecil B. DeMille actually comes out to introduce the film, and this is how he sets it. He talks about the dignity of human beings and how everyone is equal, and that everyone should be free, and everyone should have within them this strong sense of self-determination and the ability to meet that or to reach it. So like it's one of these things I've been reflecting on a little bit, and I was like, I think this is actually where this probably comes from. And I think it's so deeply embedded now within our culture that for many people they can't unsee it.
Yeah.
I tend to think of.
But go watch the movie. It's
Afro-atheist.
if you have a day to kill.
African American Christians need this. Yeah, thanks for doing your part, guys. 100% atheists in action, man.
I guess quick comment on that is I see this evolution of our ethics and how we approach the world. And, when you mentioned something, Kipp, I totally second what you say with Yahweh only caring about Israelites. But there seems to be, like, I'm sure you're aware, there are some times where you find in later literature like Jonah or stuff where there's an empathy for groups outside of the Israelites. And so what I think's happening, and this is my personal opinion based on the research I've been doing, is that you have these Jewish groups who are encountering Hellenism. They're encountering broader worlds. They're expanding the way they view God. God's no longer in a body, right? So now God has to take on some type of Platonic form. And so ethics and philosophy and science and everything slowly starts to creep its way in. It doesn't mean it stays there, as we see what happens with the racist slavery that happened in America. But overall, you kind of get this universal template where it's like, hey, we need to convert the world, right? Like all nations, tribes need to be, we need that for the second coming to happen. So there's kind of this motivated reason to go and get everyone converted and everyone brought in. And I think the show you're describing, I'm sure it had a huge impact in America, but I wouldn't be shocked if that is kind of a reflection of that age-old evolving idea of breaking down barriers that we're trying to get to, and we're still in it today. We still have these distinctions, and it's we're still trying to break those down. So it makes me think that's where I would look at that. Like, even when I look at some of the Jewish teachings about you had to go through a conversion process to become an Israelite. In fact, so much so in certain cases, some rabbis would say, hey, it's your child that will finally grant in. You will never be. You're always going to be seen as an other, but you can be part of our group. And then some of the rabbis were like, no. They found ways to reinterpret things and say Abraham would be the father of many goyim, many nations. So by the time this writing's happening, people who were not Jews were called goyim. Well, hold on. Abraham in the Jewish claim is that he is their genetic father. But how can you be a goyim, right, and be genetically connected? So they found a way to say he's the father of many goyim, and they would just go, these non-Jews who are converting, they're children of Abraham too, and they would grant in like almost like a joining the covenant, but it didn't have to be genealogically. They were adopted in, and so these ideas just kept changing over time, and it looks so man-made. It's
weird.
It's evolution taking place society-wise, in my view.
Yeah, no, absolutely makes sense. Yeah, beliefs, ideas. Brian Stevens says, is the ancient forms of slavery really that different than what we see in the Middle East today in some enclaves?
I don't know
Who wants
the answer to that.
one?
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that because I don't know the modern.
I was going to say there is actual slavery in the Middle East today. So it's, I don't know about the enclaves. I'm probably with Josh.
No, I was gonna say I remember watching a short show. I maybe it was a documentary, but it might have been just on John Oliver. I don't know. About the construction of all the soccer stadiums in Qatar, right? For the World Cup. Oliver? It might have been. Or not. I don't know.
That dude's a badass anyways.
You know what I'm talking about here, right? Like, the construction of these soccer stadiums football stadiums, in preparation for the World Cup, were built on this Middle Eastern system of what is effectively a form of slave labor. And yeah, it was a big deal. It was a massive human rights violation, and thousands, I believe it is, of hundreds at least, but certainly hundreds certainly, but possibly thousands of people died, as a result of. But yeah, just it made me think of that. So, but I don't know anything about Middle Eastern slavery either, beyond the fact that maybe they built soccer stadiums. So,
I mean, I do think an important thing to point out is there's sort of a gradation when you think about different types of slavery in this regard in the Hebrew Bible. So while we tend to think about sort of the household, the domestic slave, right, in these contexts, and that's generally what's being described in the legal passages. You also have we talked about Deuteronomy 20 earlier, and if you think about what happens with the nations the cities that are around, right, the process, Deuteronomy 20, 10-14, I think, the process is that the Israelites are supposed to approach the city and offer it an offer of shalom. Everybody knows what that word is. Is it's like an offer of peace. Now that sounds really dope, right? Oh, offer it peace. That's awesome. Yeah. So what's being offered is vassal treaty. That's what it is, vassalage. Because if you think about what happens if they accept, then everyone in the city becomes their vassal, and they become, the Hebrew word is mas. And what mas means, it's the same word that's used to describe the labor that is summoned by the king to do these massive building projects, right? And the Israelites could be mas, foreign nations, as we're talking about here, the city, they're just forced labor. They're like corvée labor, right? These are not people that become domestics. They're not like slaves that live in your house or something. But at any time, the Israelites, as according to the text, again, this sort of more utopian aspect here, because they never had this, right? Is that they could just say, that city and that city and that city, give us all your men. Time to build this thing for me, right? And they had to come. So while we would not call that slavery proper, maybe, and call it more like forced labor or corvée labor, I mean, it shares so many of the same constellation of characteristics. It just doesn't fall into that sort of that domestic slavery category. And sorry, I'll just say this. I do want to cover a couple of verses in Exodus 21, a couple of small passages, because I think there are little nuggets in there that we miss that are actually really important in this discussion. But I don't know if you guys want to go a different direction before I do that.
Don't do it. Yeah. We're getting here to the end of time. Yeah, I think it's a great time to do it.
Okay. So everybody always talks about Exodus 21, 2-6, 7-11, and 20-21, right? But what they don't tend to talk about is 26-27. Now, apologists do. Apologists like to talk about, well, now, I mean, think about it. If the master just knocks out an eye or knocks out a tooth, something so small, he's completely freed. Yeah. Like, is this thing on? What? I mean, I remember Mike Winger on any number of occasions go, something as small as small. How do you get your tooth knocked out, my guy? How do you get your eye destroyed? It's by being beaten in the face.
Hold on, an eye. I mean, I've thought about this before. Like, the fear of like, what if I take my eye out on accident doing some hard labor? An eye is not a small thing. I mean, even a tooth, right? But like, that's a whole different level. Like, bro, do not ever take my eye out, please. You know what I mean?
If this is the thing.
So
Kind of attached to it.
So the way to address, so there are two things to point out here. One is the severity of these injuries. And the way to address that is go read through the law codes, the law collections. There's a great book by Martha Roth, R-O-T-H, and it's called like The Law Collections in Asia Minor, and I can't remember. I never remember titles of books except my own, which is sad. But she gives in translation, English translation, all the major law collections, right? Okay. Go read what the penalties are for somebody knocking out a tooth, somebody knocking out an eye. They're severe. If it's someone of the same, if you read through the laws of Hammurabi, if it's someone of the same class, an awilu, a free man, or citizen, whatever, then it's lex talionis, right? Eye for eye, tooth for tooth.
Right.
But if it's someone of a lower class, it can be like 30 shekels of silver, 60 shekels of silver. And when you think about how much that is, like if you can calculate it, right? I'm thinking off the top of my head here, like somebody could reasonably earn 10 shekels of silver in a year. So if you're getting paid 60 shekels of silver, that's 6 years worth of work. That's not a small amount, right? 6 years salary. So that's the first point. So this idea that it's like this teeny tiny little thing. But the more important point is where it is in the text. So if you read verses 24 and 25, right? This is following that short section about if two men are fighting and they hit a woman who's pregnant and she miscarries, but the woman is not harmed, then there's going to be a fine that's set by the husband. But if there is harm that follows, if the woman is harmed, then it's eye for eye, tooth for tooth, right? That's where one of these couple of passages that show lex talionis, right? The law of retribution. But it says eye for eye, tooth for tooth, burn for burn, hand for hand, foot for foot, blah, 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 blah. Then it says, and if a man puts out the eye or destroys the eye of his male or female slave, does it say that the master's eye is put out? The slave is not on the same plane as the master. That slave doesn't get to say, I have a right to your eye. I have a right to your tooth. He's just set free from his debt.
Hmm.
So the slave does not get the same treatment as a free man does.
What about a chattel slave who's not in debt?
Yeah, this one's a little more tough because, first of all, I think most scholars would come down on this section of Exodus 21 as dealing with debt slavery. It's still a little debated. There's a book by Gregory Kirikinyo, 93 publication, talks about slavery in the ancient, I think it's debt slavery in the ancient Near East. But I mean, he goes into like all the bibliography and who says what. But it's arguable that chattel slaves would not be afforded this, right? Because if you read through like the laws of Hammurabi, pledges, people that are distrained, these are people that are free people or debt slave. These are people that have a status of free, but because of their debt or because of their paterfamilias' debt, they're taken into temporary bondage, temporary slavery, either to force repayment of a debt or to work to repay the debt or whatever. Special treatment is given to debt slaves. More gentle treatment is given to debt slaves. It's arguable that those same things would not, less rights would be given to a chattel slave. But assuming the best case scenario of a debt slave, they're still not afforded the same rights as the master. And the other thing, and I'll shut up, I promise. But if you think about, and nobody goes to this, hardly anybody goes to this because it's so late in the chapter, but 28 to 32, and it's a different thing, right? It's not strictly like a slave set of laws, but it's the goring ox. You guys familiar with the goring ox incident? So, if a guy owns an ox and the ox gores somebody, then, that's a whole different set of circumstances. But if the guy is told by the authorities, hey, your ox is known to gore people, he's a gorer, is what the Hebrew says. It's just such a weird word to say. Then a whole different set of punishments kicks in because it's negligence now.
Yeah.
And so if it gores a free man or a free woman or the free child, then it's lex talionis, right? But the guy that owns the ox can buy his way out of it, which is what the whole point of lex talionis was to do anyway. But then it says, or if it gores a slave, 30 shekels of silver.
Yeah.
And it's not payable to the slave's family.
No.
Dan D doesn't have any shekels. Thank you, Dan D, for that $10 donation.
But that 30 shekels of silver is not paid to the slave's family or kin. This is a property. This is property damage. It's paid to the owner of that slave.
Oh my God.
So like these are little verses that it's really good for us to know in the context of this discussion, because shit don't look good.
No.
It doesn't add up.
I'll be quiet.
Thank you, Jess. That was awesome. That was really good.
That was excellent.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We are ending here, but we do have one more question. I don't think the racial, Stacy, take over for me.
Oh, sure.
Like
I think it's more of a statement, possibly, but I don't think the racial distinction can be separated from specifically chattel slavery in the antebellum South or in the Atlantic slave trade generally. Race was an integral part of both. So, yeah.
Thank you for that. Oh,
Yeah.
one more.
And one more question from Bree. Can you imagine waiting on this panel to fundamentally ground their atheistic worldview in anything but their own unrighteousness?
I think that Bree's issue here is that she realizes that she can't instantiate the necessary preconditions to ground the ultimacy of the possibilities of impossible possibilities for the ground of all being.
Yeah.
Well said.
Exactly.
You couldn't have made it any simpler. I mean,
Not at all.
I'm just happy to stay grounded in my unrighteousness.
Yeah.
So.
And another question, really quick, if you guys have just another minute, from the Caribbean Skeptic Secularist. I have heard Christians say, when backed into a corner with genocide and slavery, from the Bible, I'm guessing, say God is all powerful, God is God, so it is okay. Don't question him. Have they come across that, meaning you? So, Have you come across that?
Not only have we all come across this, I'm sure this was my argument as a Christian.
Oh, and how would,
Think about it. Romans chapter 9, Paul is hypothetically, he's smarter than I think people give credit for him, because he's using prose, and a lot of the scholars I talk to think he knows rhetoric. So Paul is educated to some degree, and he's writing, and he has a hypothetical debate partner. He's sending this to a church in Rome he's never even seen. And he says, but you will say, if God is doing all of this, Jacob I loved, Esau I hated before they were born, so his purpose of election, hardening Pharaoh's heart, the whole nine, then he's like, then how can God blame us if he's doing all of this? And what does Paul say? He doesn't say, well, look, it's not as bad as you think. No. He says, who are you, oh man, to say to the Creator, why have you made me thus?
Yeah.
Can the creature made, he's the potter, you're the clay.
Yeah,
exactly. He does whatever the hell he wants with you. You're the human. He can do whatever. And notice it keeps being he, because it's language here. But it's like, that was my argument, is shut up. You're not God, and God can do whatever he wants. And that was enough. That was it for me.
Job. A lot of Christians, they go right to Job. Ridiculous. Like that's a real argument.
Yeah.
There's
sorry, Derek. You had good meaning behind it.
Yeah. You know what I'm saying now.
Oh, you were great on Pine Creek, Kipp, apparently.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Wallace. But you made the mistake of bringing up Job, and I just taught a course.
Oh, I love it.
I did not on Job, but one of the lectures deals with wisdom literature, and there is a reading of the book of Job, where at the end, after God goes on his big temper tantrum and shouts at Job for 3 chapters about how awesome he is and he shouldn't be questioned, and who are you, Job? Yeah. And Job's response is, yes, whatever, I'm sorry, I'm so wrong, and I'm, you win, kind of thing. There is a reading of that episode whereby, sometimes the best way to shut up a tyrant is just to say, whatever you say, man. Whatever you say.
It's true. Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Titan. I was waiting for you to see. Darden, I meant to ask, if I balance my chakras, can I open a quantum vortex as a portal? I'm not sure what that is. A higher man. I don't know. Can we do that?
Know what that
higher
is?
Vibrational plane. I'm going to say yes.
That's a great question.
I think the answer is 7.
There it is. 42, actually. 42.
Just grab your crystals and you're good to go.
Awesome. Well, all right. This is it. Thanks, guys, so much for stopping by. Before we go, I want to kind of where can we find everybody? So if anybody doesn't know where we can find all these awesome people, go ahead and start, Dr. Kipp. We'll go around the room there.
I have a YouTube channel. It's under my own name. I do counter apologetics videos and teaching videos about the Bible, and I'm working through a deep dive series on the Dead Sea Scrolls right now called Dead Sea Scrolls Unapologetically. And tomorrow you can find me on Gnostic Informant at 6:00 Pacific with Pat Lowinger. And the topic du jour this week for some reason is Yahweh's genitalia. So I'll be over there.
I can't wait to hear that one.
One of my favorite conversations.
And Neil. So come and see.
Nice.
Oh,
nice.
Here we go. Okay.
Oh, no.
You Enki'd that up.
Are there visuals? Do you have like a slideshow? Oh no.
Probably one of those guys that fixates on 15-foot whale penis. Okay, I'm here to help.
I love it.
Yes.
Thank you.
Maybe by the end of it, we'll know which animal has the closest relation to God's penis. The duck, maybe. The whale. I don't know. That was fun. Thank you. Dr. Josh, where can we find your stuff?
Yeah, I would just want to say, so like go if you're watching and you have not subscribed to Kipp's channel, like definitely do that. And find him on Twitter, Dr. Kipp Davis, because I finally got him on there, and
Nice.
throw all your questions
did.
at him that you were going to ask me. No,
Yeah.
because he'll actually answer them. No. So we are over on Digital Hammurabi. And any of the books that I've talked about, if you just go to Amazon and type in Joshua Bowen, they'll all pop up there. But I want to use the moment to plug Megan, my wife, who is actually the brains behind this whole operation. She is also an Assyriologist. She is now the host of the Bart Ehrman Misquoting Jesus podcast.
Wow.
Oh, that is so cool.
It's
Yes.
just the two of them on camera the whole time.
Oh my gosh.
Congrats.
She was, handpicked by Bart Ehrman.
It was
Right.
It was like a scene from the opening of the Book of Esther, where he brought everybody from the kingdom in.
I mean, let's try not to
co-host this
compare it to that.
podcast.
Maybe in its like board, comparative sense. No, but she's amazing, and the shows, the podcasts are incredible. But no, I'm super proud of her. She's amazing.
Nice one, Wes.
I do way too much.
Thank you, Dr. Josh. Derek, where can we find you at, man?
Host of Mythvision podcast, the YouTube channel. You can find everything there. But I do want to give a special plug first. Kipp was here like a few weeks ago. He is doing a dive on the Dead Sea Scrolls I have not seen anyone ever do, and he's highlighting things that, like, even the academics within the field they're not seeing things the way he's seeing them often. I'm not trying to poo-poo on him. I'm saying he's noticing stuff that he realizes even within the academic field, it's almost like there's apologetics there. And so he is not only fighting this bigger fight of like Christians loving to use Dead Sea Scrolls, but like the academics. He's like, hold on. We're going to deal with this. So he's taking a very deep dive.
And Derek, could I pause you for a second?
Yeah.
Because I really want to emphasize that Kipp will never say this about himself, but Kipp is a crazy Dead Sea Scrolls specialist. There's nobody else that was handpicked by Emmanuel Tove to come work with him at the Museum of the Bible. Like, you get Emmanuel Tove picking you, sorry, you got it made in the shade. All right, go ahead.
I'm not kidding. No. And I don't think we can brag enough about what he's doing. So go subscribe to him. He also is going to have a course that's going to be coming out on MVP Courses where he goes through the ancient Israelite religion. So there's a bunch coming out. And then to brag, I know how good Megan's doing because I edit those videos that he does or she's doing with him. So like I work with Bart, and when I found out that she was, even you were like, I mentioned it somewhere, and you're like, shh, you weren't supposed to say something yet. And I was like, why? I don't understand. So, but yeah, Megan's kicking butt. And now she's gotten everything perfected. Because before she would drop her little cup or whatever on the table and be like, I'd be like, Megan, I'm editing and it's killing me. Can we mute the mic?
But the beautiful thing, sorry, I'm just so,
go for it.
Right.
This is great.
I love it.
I'm very serious about this. Yeah, I met Megan at Hopkins, right? She was a couple years behind me in the program. I taught her Sumerian and Akkadian for a semester each. She, if anybody happens to think that I'm smart, she like blows me out of the water. And what's amazing about the dynamic that she has, but one of the reasons that she fit that role so perfectly is because she's not a New Testament specialist. And she brings this entire ancient Near Eastern understanding to the discussions. And she does it. It's just,
Well, Josh, I have to brag being somebody who's not, her spouse. And I want to say the question she asks him, you don't hear people that are like in New Testament stuff saying the questions she's saying. So I'm impressed as much too. I'm like,
That's
oh my gosh,
excellent.
she's like a perfect fit. So
So
if anyone walks away, it's subscribe to Kipp. It's literally check out Megan, and I think everybody here is
and go to
How exciting.
and go to Derek's channel to watch virtually
I love
everybody
the love, you guys.
because everybody is there,
Yeah.
and I mean everybody.
I was
Like
Kipp,
it is a repository of scholarship on everything. Well, maybe
Derek-
not quite everything, but
Derek has
in
this
there.
crazy ability to convince people to come on and do interviews with him. I don't know how he does it. I tried to get John Collins on the channel.
I do. I have to brag.
And John was like, in a minute. Derek, he was, oh yeah, come on up. I'll do courses with you, right? Like,
you know what it is? If you're out there and you imagine when you first met Megan, all right? I'm sure there was a nervousness in your stomach about approaching or maybe what to say or whatever. I just go, screw it, John. Do you want to do courses with me, bro? I love your work. I practically tell them how much I worship them, and now I want to put them on a pedestal, and they're like, who wouldn't want to be on a pedestal? Of course I'm going to come over there to that guy's channel,
What's amazing about this now, because you do need to go to Mythvision if you guys go there and watch everything. But what's wonderful about this is like early on, I was really trying hard to send people Derek's way, and very quickly he spun it all up himself. But now, like I'm on the lookout. Like I'm reading a book by a scholar out at Cardiff, Dylan Johnson. Dylan Johnson. And he graduated 2018, so he's a young scholar, but he's an A&E law specialist at Hebrew Bible, and like brilliant book he's written. But anyway, like I'm emailing him about something separate, and in the back of my mind thinking, all right, how do I angle this so I can like lay the groundwork to get him on Derek's channel, because he would make a brilliant interview. So yeah, go over there.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
Awesome.
Thank you, Michael and Apostacie as well.
Yes,
thank you both.
guys.
Thanks for being here, guys.
Thanks for taking the time. Thanks for hanging out with us for a little bit. You guys are awesome. Keep doing what you do.
Yeah.
Stacy, I hear you would like to take us out.
Oh, okay. I thought you were going to say
In a prayer.
I was like, I'm not. No.
Well, yeah, okay. We won't do that. You know where you can find us. We'll find us here. And our little things we do on the side.
Yeah.
Take us out in a prayer.
Yes. Can everyone please bow their heads in prayer? Just joking. I love when people do. So thank you.
It's so hard to keep a straight face.
I bowed my head.
You guys.
You totally did.
Oh, you're the best. No,
the first time I left seminary, at which every class opens and closes in prayer, and I went to Hopkins and sat in on my first class. I shit you not, like as the professor walked in, everybody got quiet.
Oh, you.
And like my buddy next to me was like, evangelical.
I could totally see myself doing that, like in my old life. Yes, for sure.
Oh,
sorry.
That's okay. I just want to thank our patrons, Ryan, Deneen Murphy, Dan D, Michael Wiseman, Kathy Cotton, Cindy Plaza, Sunny Shell, Aaron Colson, and Phil Calderon. And also, don't forget to be here next week on Wednesday. We're going to have Janice Selby here. She's amazing. If you've not heard of her, she's from Divorcing Religion podcast, and she has a wealth of knowledge. So once again, thank you so much, everyone. I hope you have a great week, and we'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye. Buy that book.